Chapter 2: The Power of Decision. For whatever reason, I had to wake up in a ditch in order to garner the motivation to commit to changing my financial situation. I guess it was because I was in a state of denial, too ashamed to face up to my reality, and possibly still hoping, wishing, praying that my luck would somehow change. I knew I didn't want anyone else to bail me out. It wasn't as though I was seeking a knight in shining armour. I wanted to experience the pride and satisfaction of repaying all of my debt myself by my own means, and yet I wasn't doing anything about it. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. Much of my debt had been accumulated by investments into my business, in programs and business coaching. It wasn't a lack of strategy that I was suffering from when it came to making enough money to not only live, but also pay off my debt. I had experienced success in my online coaching business, but for whatever reason, I was bumping up against an invisible ceiling on my income. Then, in the 12 months leading up to starting this paid in full journey, I had been spiraling downhill, and at the time, I didn't know why. I felt completely out of control and I was looking externally for answers. I was terrified, if I'm honest. I threw more money into my business. I was seeking some magic bullet outside of myself that would give me everything I wanted and set me on my path to financial freedom. I realize now that there is no magic bullet outside of myself, that in order to change my situation, I had to look within and change myself. The first thing I had to do was to decide. I made a decision to become paid in full. The impact of a decision is so powerful. I'd spent literally decades of my life trying to get a handle on my finances and pay off my debt, and yet I always failed, and I didn't have the first clue why. I know now that I hadn't really committed to the decision to become debt-free. I always had one foot in the "I really want to be debt-free" camp and the other foot in the "yeah, but it's just too hard" camp. And the internal conflict was keeping me stuck. You see, there's a huge gulf between wanting to achieve something and deciding to achieve something. And in that gulf exists fear, limitation, and excuses. Reasons to stay in bed instead of getting up and taking massive positive action. But by actually deciding, you're leaping over that gulf and committing. It's empowering and it changes everything. A decision takes you out of the realms of limiting beliefs and internal conflict because you're making a declaration, setting an intention that cuts you off from all alternatives. You're burning the bridges to take the island, so to speak. The derivation of the word decide is literally to sever or cut off. Once you empower yourself with a decision, you embolden your state of mind and begin to think differently. A decision refines your focus on what it is that you want to achieve. You've leapt, and if you don't start moving forwards towards the goal, you'll fall. It requires massive action and doing things differently. I remember listening to an interview with Bob Proctor, and he said something that I'd never really considered until this significant moment. Bob was talking about a couple who were telling him how much they'd love to buy a property on the coast. Bob asked them, "Well, why don't you buy it then if you love it so much?" The couple retorted, "Well, we don't have the money. We can't afford those prices." And Bob replied, "You don't need the money." The couple were confused, as I was at that point, and maybe you are now. And the couple asked, "What do you mean? Of course we need the money." And Bob said, "You don't need the money to buy the house because you haven't yet decided to buy the house." The couple was stuck in the gulf between wanting and deciding, where, as I said earlier, limitations and excuses exist. They didn't need the money because they hadn't decided to buy the house. If they made the decision to buy the house, they would free themselves from the gulf so they could move forward and take the required action to raise the money. That was a major light bulb moment for me. Bob concluded this interview by sharing that this couple made their decision, and within 12 months, they were in their dream home on the coast. That's the power of decision. And as Anthony Robbins says, it's in your moments of decision that your destiny is shaped. I have made many decisions in my life, and as the saying goes, I leapt and grew my wings on the way. My business is one such example. I resigned from my respectable 9-to-5 job in the financial services industry. I know the irony, right? I'm cringing. To start my coaching business with no clue how I was going to make it happen. However, I had decided that I was going to create a business of my own. I was excited and committed, and really that was all I needed to start. In my experience, and I'm sure in yours too, when you make the leap, that is, when you make a non-negotiable, no-nonsense decision to change some aspect of your life, perhaps one that you've been putting off because of your dear old friend fear, the ground beneath you rises to meet you. What felt like a leap into a scary, empty, plunging abyss actually becomes just a large step forward onto a different terrain. You find your footing, and the next logical step becomes apparent. It just wasn't visible from your old vantage point. This is when the how shows up. Your brain is like a goal-seeking missile, and as soon as you've committed to your what and you've leapt that gulf, your brain starts working for you, seeking out the how, and you start getting the ideas, possibilities, and resources to help you get moving. This is when you know that you've made a real decision. Rarely in this monumental moment of decision is there fear or doubt. There's just excitement, relief, and a renewed energy and enthusiasm for life. And no better place to start.